My family favored my sister for years, so I took my revenge at my wedding. My parents always liked to say that my sister Celeste was born to be a star. And maybe that should have been a sweet sentiment, something that brought our family together. Instead, it became the wedge that drove us apart. From my earliest memories, I recall our home filled with an odd, unspoken agreement that Celeste's every need should come first. She was the talented one, the beautiful one, the one with that bright spark everyone seemed to notice. Meanwhile, I was the second child, the shadow. At first, I shrugged it off as normal. After all, wasn't it common for older siblings to get more attention? In preschool, my parents spent hours hand-making the perfect costumes for Celeste's pageants. If I was lucky, I got a store-bought outfit or maybe a leftover piece of fabric for my own kindergarten performances. In elementary school, Mom and Dad beamed when Celeste landed the lead role in the school play, while I stood in the background choir trying hard not to feel like an afterthought. By the time we hit our teen years, it had become routine. Celeste would excel and the family would shower her with praise. I'd get a polite pat on the back if that. I didn't blame Celeste entirely, not at first. She was simply doing what she did best, shining, and I existed in her orbit. If people were drawn to her light, I figured that was my fate, but as the years passed, my patience wore thin. I watched my parents pour money into Celeste's private dance lessons, her fancy summer camps, and later her expensive college tuition at a prestigious art school. They co-signed for her first car, a sleek hatchback that she barely drove. Meanwhile, I rode the bus in high school and had to balance a part-time job while scraping for scholarships when it was time for college. The moment I started feeling like my entire existence revolved around my sister happened during my junior year of high school. I remember coming home, proud of having aced a major history exam, but my parents were too busy gushing over Celeste's upcoming dance recital. "It's the perfect chance for her to get scouted," my mother kept saying, eyes shining. That same night, Dad barely acknowledged my news. His only response was a half-hearted nod before pivoting back to Celeste's schedules, rehearsals, and ticket sales. In that split second, something in me hardened, a tiny seed of bitterness took root, and I felt it sprout every time Celeste's name was spoken, as if she were the only child worth celebrating. By the time I was old enough to move out, I did so with silent relief, grateful for the chance to finally be my own person, away from the constant comparisons and overshadowing. I found an apartment in a nearby city, landed a decent job, and for a while I convinced myself the resentment would fade now that I had some distance. I was wrong, because every phone call from Mom began with, "Have you talked to Celeste lately? She's doing so well," or "Celeste's new show just got rave reviews, did you see?" There was never "How are you, sweetheart?" or anything new and exciting with you. Still, I tried to keep the peace. Family is family after all, and I always hoped things might change. But old habits die hard, and favoritism had become the air we all breathed. Then, to complicate matters, Celeste took a temporary job in my city, some kind of contract position teaching dance workshops. Suddenly, she was dropping by unannounced, her arms overflowing with trophies and ribbons, recounting stories of standing ovations and wide-eyed admirers. My parents called me frequently, urging me to show her around, make her feel welcome, and support her endeavors. There was a time I would have done it gladly, but by then my patience was frayed beyond repair. So I grit my teeth, nodded politely, and played the role of the dutiful sister. But each encounter with her left a sour taste in my mouth. She radiated confidence, graciously accepting my forced compliments, never once pausing to ask about my life. Deep down, I wondered if she even noticed my growing resentment or if she simply didn't care. Then I met Adrian, the man who would eventually become my husband. He was everything Celeste wasn't, soft-spoken, genuinely curious about other people, and blissfully unaware of my family's dynamic. He and I clicked in a way I never had with anyone else. For the first time, I felt seen for who I was, not just someone's overshadowed sibling. When I introduced him to my parents, they seemed polite enough, but I could tell they were only half paying attention, probably daydreaming about the next big accomplishment Celeste would bring home. Still, Adrian never wavered. He supported me through every emotional roller coaster my family put me through. When Adrian proposed, my parents acted excited, yet they promptly wondered if Celeste might choreograph a dance performance at the reception or if she might even need a special role in the ceremony. They didn't ask how I wanted my wedding to be or what my dream dress looked like. They simply latched on to how Celeste might shine on my special day. I tried not to let it get to me, telling myself that a wedding was about me and Adrian, no matter how much my family tried to twist it otherwise. But as the wedding planning progressed, I realized something crucial. This event might be the first time my family ever had to focus on me, yet even then I could see them struggling to center me in their plans. They kept finding ways to involve Celeste, ways to direct attention to her. In phone calls, they urged me to keep an open mind if Celeste wanted to sing at the reception or maybe even present a surprise performance. They admired the color scheme I had chosen, but only if it complemented Celeste's complexion, since she'd be in the wedding party. Over time, the frustration built into a silent, raging storm inside me. I tried for months to quell the anger, telling myself the wedding was about celebrating love, not seeking revenge. But the more my parents insisted on Celeste's inclusion, the less I felt my own voice. It was my wedding, yet it seemed the only thing my family cared about was how Celeste would feature in the day's events. Night after night, I lay awake, gripped by a fierce kind of hurt I'd never known before. A bitter thought crept in. Maybe it's time they finally acknowledge how much they've hurt me. Maybe it's time to turn the tables. That was how the plan for my revenge began to take shape. I never thought I had it in me, this desire to strike back in such a personal way. But a lifetime of neglect and belittlement had hollowed me out, leaving behind a determination to finally stand up for myself. My wedding was approaching, and if my family wouldn't willingly give me center stage on what was supposed to be the most important day of my life, then I would take it. I can't pinpoint the exact moment my plan crystallized. Maybe it was after my 5th or 6th wedding-related phone call with my mother, each conversation more stifling than the last. This particular phone call started like any other, Mom rattling off the endless ways we could highlight Celeste at the reception. Would it be too much to give her a solo performance? Maybe we could rearrange the schedule so Celeste's segment didn't overlap with the toast. It took every ounce of composure not to blurt out exactly what was on my mind, that this was my wedding, not Celeste's show. I went through the motions of politeness, though my patience wore thinner with every second. After Mom hung up, I stared at my phone in disbelief, half expecting it to ring again with another brilliant idea to spotlight Celeste. That's when I remembered a text I'd received earlier from an old friend, Sienna, someone who knew my family's dynamic better than most. "Sienna, how's wedding prep going, surviving the Celeste spotlight?" The phrase made me laugh, a sarcastic, dry chuckle. If anyone understood my frustration, it was Sienna. She'd been around since high school and had witnessed up close the ways my parents put Celeste on a pedestal. She also knew I wasn't naturally vindictive, but she'd sensed the changes in me over the last year, the building resentment, the bruised self-esteem, the quiet anger that needed an outlet. I texted her back, summarizing the latest fiasco. They want her to perform an entire set at the reception, like multiple songs, it's ridiculous. She replied almost immediately. "Sienna, that's insane. This is your day, stand up for yourself." Her words triggered something in me, stand up for yourself. The more I repeated them in my head, the more I realized that's exactly what I intended to do. But how? The polite, conflict-averse version of me would have simply endured the slight or at best thrown a small complaint, yet there was another voice in my mind now, one that had grown louder over the years. It whispered, "They never gave you the recognition you deserved. Why not take it by force?" That voice became my co-conspirator as I started drafting the details of my revenge. I wanted something that wouldn't just diminish Celeste's star power, but also force my family to reckon with the years of favoritism. Yet I had to be careful, anything too blatant would risk blowing up in my face. I pictured a scenario where Celeste might have a meltdown or where my parents would shrug off my wedding entirely, and that wasn't the outcome I desired. I wanted them to feel the consequences of their actions, to experience the hurt I'd lived with for so long. A few nights later, Adrian and I were sitting on the couch, him thumbing through a wedding vendor catalog, me half listening as I jotted down notes on a notepad. He glanced over at my scribbles, eyebrows raised. "What's all that?" he asked. I hesitated. "Just ideas," I murmured, pressing the pen to my lips. Adrian wasn't one for drama or vengeance. Telling him I was plotting something underhanded might sour the peace between us. For a moment, guilt twisted in my gut. Did I really want to risk bringing negativity into our marriage before it had even begun? But then I remembered the pitying glances he'd shoot me every time my parents dismissed me, the look in his eyes that silently asked, "Why don't they see how great you are?" If he had an inkling of my scheme, maybe he wouldn't be entirely opposed. After all, he was tired of watching me get trampled too. "Adrian," I began cautiously, what if my parents keep pushing Celeste into the spotlight on our wedding day? How would you feel about me, I don't know, taking some control back?" His lips curved into a half smile. "Control how?" "I just mean if they want to give Celeste time on stage, maybe I have a special moment of my own. A surprise. Something that reminds everyone that this is actually our day, not hers." Adrian's eyes sparkled with intrigue. He didn't pry further and I didn't volunteer details, but he nodded, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Whatever you need to do," he said simply. That was all the encouragement I needed. Over the following weeks, I began laying the groundwork. First, I told my parents I'd be honored to have Celeste perform a single song, just one. I feigned excitement, suggesting we keep it a secret from the rest of the guests so it would be a surprise treat. My parents, thrilled, relayed the news to Celeste, who promptly called me to discuss her creative vision. She wanted mood lighting, stage props, maybe even backup dancers if we could swing it. I humored her every idea with wide-eyed enthusiasm. In reality, I was maneuvering behind the scenes. I knew Celeste's performance would be a highlight for my family, so I arranged for a discreet conversation with the wedding DJ, who also happened to be an old friend from college. I confided in him that there was something special I wanted to do immediately after Celeste's performance. He was more than happy to help, especially when I hinted it might be a little dramatic. Then I set up a meeting with the venue coordinator, ensuring that certain technical details, like microphone access and spotlight controls, would be at my disposal. I wanted the element of timing on my side, the ability to pivot the atmosphere at a moment's notice. It was like planning a small battle, each arrangement a calculated step. Meanwhile, my family continued to fawn over Celeste's big number. Every group chat, every phone call with relatives, every conversation with wedding vendors, everything circled back to Celeste's shining moment. "She's going to blow everyone away," my father said proudly, as if she were single-handedly elevating our entire event with her presence. Mom piped in about how lucky I was to have such a talented sister. I swallowed the bitterness, outwardly playing along like a doting sibling. Inside, though, I was methodically preparing for the day I'd flip the script. Part of me felt a pang of remorse at the deception. It wasn't so much that I wanted to ruin Celeste's performance, but I needed that performance to be overshadowed by my own statement, a moment that would shift the spotlight onto me, or better yet, onto the truth of how I'd been treated all these years. My heart hammered with a mixture of guilt and anticipation every time I replayed the plan in my head, imagining the look on my sister's face when the attention slipped away from her. Yes, it was petty. Yes, it was the kind of thing that could fracture our family even more. But the memory of my childhood, the years of neglect, the countless times I was cast aside, those memories were too raw, too overwhelming to ignore anymore. If my family insisted on turning my wedding into another episode of Celeste Takes Center Stage, then they deserved whatever fallout came next. As the date inched closer, I found myself alternating between excitement and dread. There was a voice inside me that questioned whether I was going too far, but then I'd see Celeste waltzing around with that smug smile, rehearsing at the venue, soaking in all the admiration like she'd been crowned queen of the event. And I knew I couldn't go back. My parents might never look at me the same way after this, but maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me. My wedding dress was a vision of tulle and satin, cascading in soft folds that made me feel, for once, like I was the star of my own life. As I stood before the mirror during one of my last fittings, I tried to focus on the intricate lacework on the bodice and the gentle shimmer of the beading. Instead, my mind kept drifting to the plan, the moment I'd orchestrated to finally take the spotlight from Celeste. A swirl of anticipation and guilt twisted in my stomach. Was I really about to do this on my wedding day? "Is everything okay?" the seamstress asked, noticing the tension in my posture. Her pin-cushioned wrist hovered near the hem of my gown, ready to adjust any loose threads. I forced a small smile, nodding. "I'm just nervous," I lied. It was an easy enough excuse. Of course, a bride is allowed to feel overwhelmed before her big day. She wouldn't suspect I was planning a stunt that would turn my sister's perfect performance into a sideshow. Outside the fitting room, I heard my mother's voice float through the hallway. "Oh, Celeste, I can't believe you're performing that song. It's going to be the highlight of the wedding." My mother's excitement oozed through every syllable. The seamstress raised an eyebrow at me in silent question, and I shook my head, signaling I didn't want to talk about it. Instead, I lifted the skirt a little higher so she could finish pinning. But inside, I seethed. The highlight of the wedding, huh? Not me, not my vows, not the celebration of love between me and Adrian. No, in my mother's world, it was Celeste's time to shine again. By the time I was done, Celeste and my mother had already moved on to another topic, probably color coordination for her stage outfit. I stepped out in my normal clothes, determined to avoid them both, but I wasn't quick enough. Celeste spotted me in the corridor, a wide grin on her face. "Oh, you look so pretty," she cooed, motioning to the fitting room where I'd just left my wedding dress behind. "I can't wait to see it on the big day. It'll look even better once you've, done your hair and everything." It was a backhanded compliment if I'd ever heard one. I gritted my teeth and made a conscious effort to stay polite. "Thanks," I said flatly. Then, attempting to be the gracious sister I'd always been typecast as, I asked, "How's your performance prep coming along?" Her entire face lit up, and I watched with a detached fascination as she launched into an enthusiastic rundown of her rehearsal schedule, the costume ideas she'd cycled through, and the special vocal warm-ups she was practicing. She ended by gushing, "I just hope I can make the day extra memorable for you." I nearly laughed at the irony. Trust me, I thought, this day will be unforgettable for a lot of reasons you're not expecting. But I kept my composure, nodding as though I couldn't wait to be overshadowed at my own wedding. Later that evening, I retreated to my apartment where Adrian was waiting with takeout containers and a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter. He greeted me with a tight hug, then studied my expression. "Rough day?" he asked softly. My shoulders slumped. They're acting like Celeste's performance is the main event. My mom literally said it's going to be the highlight of the wedding. Adrian frowned. "I'm sorry, you don't deserve that." He paused, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "Are you still, planning something?" I exhaled, leaning against him. "I have to, they'll never learn otherwise." He pressed his lips into a thin line, looking torn. "Okay, just make sure you don't regret it. I don't want our wedding to be tainted by a feud. We should be celebrating." I reached up to squeeze his hand. "I know, but it's not really a feud, it's a lesson, a final stand. After this, maybe they'll start treating me like an actual person, and if not, well, at least I'll have gotten a load off my chest." He nodded, though the worry didn't leave his eyes. The final days leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of vendor confirmations, final guest counts, and endless phone calls. My mother called incessantly to discuss Celeste's needs, a microphone test, a brief run-through on the actual stage, and additional time for her to rehearse with the DJ. I directed them all to the DJ friend I'd set up. He was in on my plan, or at least, he knew I had a special surprise that would overshadow Celeste's moment. He had promised not to mention a word to her or my parents. Celeste, for her part, grew more and more animated every time we crossed paths. At my bachelorette party, where most brides would be the center of attention, she dominated every conversation about her upcoming performance. The tension in the room was palpable, but my friends, knowing how deep this wound ran, tried to refocus the celebration on me whenever they could. Still, Celeste found ways to steer the talk back to her. By the end of the night, I was exhausted from smiling through clenched teeth and faking interest in her endless monologues. At the rehearsal dinner, the dynamic reached a fever pitch. My parents toasted Celeste and me in the same breath as though she were an equal host of the event. "Thank you to both my beautiful daughters," my dad said, raising a glass, "for making this an evening to remember. We can't wait to see your talents on display, Celeste, and of course, we're so proud of the bride." The slight sting of that last sentence, "of course, we're so proud of the bride," burned in my chest like a brand. They included me almost as an afterthought, a footnote in Celeste's spotlight. I glanced around the table. Adrian squeezed my hand under the tablecloth, a silent reminder of why we were there. My friends, some of whom knew the plan, exchanged knowing looks. And my sister, perched regally in her seat, soaked in the attention like a sunflower turning toward the sun. That night I lay awake, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I imagined the next day, my wedding day. My plan hinged on a single pivotal moment. Right after Celeste's performance, the DJ would switch things up. I'd have a microphone of my own and a carefully orchestrated reveal that would make sure no one could ignore me anymore. I wasn't aiming to humiliate Celeste exactly, but I wasn't going to let her overshadow me either, not this time. I pictured the expressions on my parents' faces, on Celeste's face when the focus shifted so drastically. Would they be shocked, angry, finally remorseful? My heart pounded at the thought. A voice in the back of my mind warned me that I was crossing a line, that I might alienate my family forever, but a stronger voice, the one born of years of being second best, urged me forward. "They need to see me," it whispered. "They need to know how they've made me feel." As morning crept closer, I tossed and turned, second-guessing myself, feeling the weight of the plan press down like a heavy blanket. But every time I considered backing out, I remembered my mother's words. Celeste's performance is going to be the highlight of the wedding. If that was truly what my parents believed, then maybe they deserved what was coming. Tomorrow, dressed in white and surrounded by hundreds of guests, I'd finally step out of Celeste's shadow. And I vowed that, for once, all eyes would be on me, no matter the cost. The morning of my wedding arrived cloaked in a hazy mix of excitement and dread. I woke up early in the guest suite of the venue, the sky still an inky blue outside the window. My eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep, but there was no way I could slip back into unconsciousness. This was the day I would become Adrian's wife, and the day I would finally seize the spotlight I'd been denied all my life. I'd insisted on getting ready away from my parents and Celeste, claiming I wanted a quiet morning of reflection. Truthfully, I couldn't handle one more conversation about how Celeste's performance would be the biggest highlight of my wedding day. My bridal party, Sienna and two other close friends kept me company as a small team of stylists worked on my hair and makeup. The atmosphere should have been serene with laughter and light gossip, but the tension under my skin refused to abate. My mind churned with last-minute worries. What if Celeste sensed something was off? What if my plan backfired? What if I ruined my own wedding in the process? Every so often, Sienna would catch my eye in the mirror and give me a reassuring nod. She knew I was on edge. She also understood this wasn't just about overshadowing Celeste, it was about reclaiming my identity in a family that had never truly seen me. "Relax," she mouthed silently, touching my shoulder. I tried to heed her advice, breathing in and out until my makeup artist lightly scolded me for moving too much. Eventually, my dress was fastened, the veil carefully pinned in place, and my bouquet placed in my hands. I stood there, gazing at my reflection in the mirror. For a split second, the air around me stilled, and I felt hopeful. Despite everything, I really did want this to be a happy day. Adrian was the man I loved, and we were pledging our lives to each other. A quiet voice inside me suggested that maybe I should let the plan go, that love and joy might be enough to outshine Celeste's presence. But another voice, louder and more deeply rooted, insisted that I follow through. I could be happy and I could be heard. With a final deep breath, I left the suite and made my way to the main hall where the ceremony would take place. The venue was a converted old estate with high ceilings and massive windows letting in the golden morning light. Rows upon rows of chairs were filled with friends, extended family, and acquaintances I'd barely met. I could hear soft music playing. Adrian's aunt had volunteered to provide live piano, and her gentle notes drifted through the room like a lullaby. My father was waiting for me at the entrance. When he saw me, his eyes lit up, and for a moment I glimpsed genuine pride. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. It was one of the only times I'd seen him overwhelmed in a way that had nothing to do with Celeste. I forced a smile, my throat tight. It was bittersweet. Why did it take my wedding day for him to see me this way? He offered me his arm and we stepped into the aisle. The hush that fell over the crowd was surreal. All eyes turned to me, and for the first time in my life I felt that weight, everyone focusing on me and no one else. My steps felt almost dreamlike as I drifted toward Adrian. He stood at the altar, eyes shining with emotion. In that single instant, my resentment and anger ebbed. My heart soared at the sight of the man who chose me, who valued me in a way my parents never had. The vows came next, a soft exchange of promises that brought tears to more than one set of eyes in the audience. I tried to anchor myself in that moment, focusing on the ring, the trembling in Adrian's voice, the gentle squeeze of his hands around mine. We kissed to applause and scattered laughter, but the hush returned just as quickly. Celeste wasn't yet the center of attention. This was my moment. After the ceremony, everyone funneled into the reception area, which had been decorated in soft golds and creams at my request. I felt like I was floating as I accepted congratulations, hugging old friends, greeting relatives. My mother was busy boasting to a table of cousins about Celeste's upcoming performance, no surprise there. But for a little while, I managed to avoid any direct conversation about it. Adrian and I shared our first dance, swirling around the polished floor under a canopy of twinkling lights. It was perfect, magical even. Yet underneath the fairy tale glow, my plan awaited execution. The DJ friend I'd enlisted caught my eye from his station. He gave a subtle nod, confirming everything was in place. The closer we came to Celeste's performance, the more my stomach knotted. I felt like I was balancing on a tightrope between sheer excitement and gut-wrenching fear. Finally, my mother bustled over, practically vibrating with anticipation. "It's almost time," she said in a hushed tone, as though Celeste were about to grace us with a royal decree. "Are you ready?" I offered a serene smile, a rehearsed expression of support. "Absolutely, Mom," I replied, ignoring the knot in my chest. "I'm really looking forward to it." Mom beamed. "Your sister going to bring the house down?" she whispered, then dashed off to make sure Celeste was ready in her designated dressing area. In a matter of minutes, people found their way to their seats, the lights dimmed slightly, and the DJ's microphone crackled to life. I stood near the back of the room, tucked against one of the decorated pillars. Adrian joined me, slipping an arm around my waist. "You can still back out," he whispered. I glanced up at him, grateful for his concern, but I shook my head. "No, this is what I need to do." He kissed my temple. "All right, I'm with you." The spotlight flicked on, illuminating the small stage at the far end of the reception hall. Celeste stepped into it, wearing a shimmering gown that made her look like a movie star. A collective murmur of admiration rippled through the guests. My parents, seated near the front, were positively glowing with pride. The music began, soft strings and piano, a slow, dramatic intro that allowed Celeste to captivate everyone with her poise before she even sang a note. I felt my heart hammer, adrenaline coursing through my veins. My sister's voice rose, strong and melodic, enveloping the room in a hush of awe, but I barely heard the lyrics. My eyes kept darting to the DJ, waiting for the moment we'd planned. I swallowed hard, trying to breathe normally. This was it. The wedding I'd dreamed of, overshadowed once more by Celeste, except I wasn't going to let her have the final word. When her song neared its dramatic crescendo, my pulse pounded so loudly I thought I might collapse from nerves. Adrian's grip on my waist tightened in solidarity. "Almost there," I told myself, "almost there." Then Celeste hit her final note, the high, sustained pitch that was meant to ring out like a triumph, and right on cue, the lights shifted abruptly. The microphone feed changed, the DJ began to fade her music, and I stepped into the second spotlight, mic in hand, ready to shake the foundations of my family's favoritism once and for all. I'd practiced this moment in my head countless times, but I never anticipated just how intense it would feel when the bright beam of the spotlight snapped onto me. My heart thundered in my ears, and my legs felt like jelly beneath the delicate layers of my wedding gown. In that first, pulsing second of silence, right after Celeste's grand finale faded and before I spoke, my eyes swept the room. I could see my mother's face frozen in a mixture of delight and confusion, my father starting to lean forward as if to stand up, and Celeste herself blinking rapidly under the sudden shift of the lights. "Thank you, Celeste," I began, my voice a little shaky at first. I held the microphone with both hands, determined to steady the tremor in my fingers. I forced a bright smile like the gracious bride I was supposed to be, and then took a breath to steady my racing pulse. "That was such a beautiful performance. I'm so happy you could share your talent with all of us today." Celeste stood center stage, still catching her breath, microphone in her own hand. She hadn't expected the abrupt fade out of her music, and it showed in the flicker of shock that crossed her face. But she recovered quickly, offering the audience a dazzling grin as though she'd planned this duet of tributes all along. "Anything for my sister," she managed, though I could see the questions forming in her eyes. A ripple of polite applause went through the crowd as I stepped forward, the train of my dress trailing behind me. This was the tricky part, balancing a sincere thank you with the raw honesty I needed to release. My carefully rehearsed lines floated to the surface of my mind. I'd planned a speech that sounded graceful on the surface but held a razor edge of truth underneath. A speech that would lay bare the years of favoritism if only my family cared to read between the lines. I'd like to say a few words, I continued. Today has been such a dream for me and Adrian, surrounded by all the people who mean the most to us. We are so grateful for each one of you, my dear friends, my loving family. I paused, allowing myself a moment to swallow the lump forming in my throat, and especially my sister Celeste, who has always been, well, the shining star of our family. A few polite chuckles rippled across the room, but those who knew me best exchanged uneasy glances. They recognized a certain tension in my tone, something deeper than just playful sibling banter. Celeste's smile wavered just slightly, but she kept it plastered on her face. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother inch forward on her chair as if bracing for something unexpected. Celeste's performance, as you just witnessed, was breathtaking, I said, letting my voice ring out a little louder. And you know, I've always admired her talent, her confidence, and the way she lights up a room. My pulse hammered as I pressed on. Growing up, I often felt like she was the sun and I was just an orbiting planet reflecting her light, and for a long time I was okay with that. She's a force to be reckoned with. A murmur spread through the guests. Celeste's posture stiffened as the sincerity of my words took on a sharper edge. Adrian stood nearby, arms folded, brows drawn in concern, but he let me continue without stepping in. He understood that this was my moment, for better or worse. Some of you might not know this, I went on, willing my voice not to shake, but there were moments, many moments, when I wondered if I'd ever get a chance to shine in my own life, to be seen for who I am, not just as Celeste's sister. My eyes swept across the audience. I caught the expressions of some distant relatives, their faces tinged with surprise or discomfort. Then I settled my gaze on my mother and father, or as my parents' afterthought, I added. A hush fell over the hall, thick and charged. My mother's lips parted, possibly to protest, but she seemed at a loss for words. My father's face clouded with confusion and dawning alarm, as though he'd only now realized something was seriously amiss. I pressed on, surprising even myself with how calm my voice sounded. But today, on my wedding day, I'm finally standing in a spotlight that feels like mine. I paused, letting that statement hang in the air, mine. And I'd like to share a little something in return, not a song, I don't have that kind of talent, but a story. A story about what it means to find your own light, especially when you've grown up feeling invisible. My father tried to step forward then, mouth opening in protest. Maybe he wanted to stop me, to defuse the situation before it escalated. But Adrian, my gentle, protective Adrian, shifted to block him, gently shaking his head. The message was clear, let her speak. I held my chin up, forcing my gaze not to waver. When I was a kid, I loved reading about constellations and astronomy. It fascinated me how some stars outshine others, and yet they all have a place in the sky. No star is truly worthless, even if it's small, even if it's overshadowed by a brighter one. I glanced at Celeste, who was standing like a statue, eyes glued to me. I realized that this is my wedding, my chance to recognize that I'm a star in my own right. And I refuse to let that be dimmed, today of all days. A smattering of uncertain applause started somewhere in the back of the room, quickly dying away as confusion set in among the guests. Some of them plainly didn't understand the subtext. Others did, shifting in their seats, sensing the wave of tension about to break. My mother's expression looked pained, a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. She could no longer pretend this was going to be a simple thank you speech. I offered a practiced smile, one I'd honed over years of polite placation. Don't worry, I said, my voice softer now. This isn't about ruining the wedding. I love my family, but I need you, all of you, to understand how it feels to live in someone else's shadow. My gaze moved pointedly to my parents, my mother especially. Every child deserves to feel cherished. Every child deserves more than polite acknowledgement. They deserve love, support, and attention that's not tethered to the success of another sibling. Silence settled in. Even Celeste, so used to commanding a stage, didn't seem to know how to respond. Her eyes darted to our mother, to our father, and then back to me. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I took a breath, tears welling unexpectedly in my eyes. So on this day, my wedding day, I'm letting go of the bitterness. I'm choosing to step into my own light. Adrian and I together are forging a life where we both get to shine. I turned to Adrian, reaching for his hand. He squeezed my fingers gently, and I could see the compassion in his gaze. I hope everyone in this room can be happy for us, not just proud of how well Celeste performs on stage or how she's the star of our family. Because the truth is, I'm ready to be a star too. A mixture of relief, pride, and concern flickered over Adrian's face. Slowly, I lowered the microphone. The hush remained, like the air was charged with static electricity. From somewhere near the back, a hesitant clap broke the spell. Others joined in, but it wasn't the thunderous applause Celeste was used to. It was more scattered, thoughtful, as though people were trying to decipher what had just happened. I turned toward Celeste, my heart pounding. She stood there, expression unreadable. The confident glow she usually wore had wavered, leaving something more vulnerable in its place. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the air between us thick with the weight of shared history. The DJ, sensing the need for a transition, gently cued soft background music. A mellow tune that signaled this confrontation had reached its climax. My mother rose from her seat, her face a portrait of turmoil. My father looked stunned, like he'd been dropped into a scene he had never imagined. Meanwhile, guests began murmuring among themselves, uncertain whether to approach to congratulate me or to check on Celeste. With my speech delivered and my truth laid bare, an odd numbness settled in. I'd done it. I'd wrested the spotlight from Celeste, if only for a few precious minutes, and I'd spoken my heart in front of everyone. A swirling mix of relief and terror filled me. What happens now? Adrian leaned down, voice gentle in my ear. I'm proud of you, he whispered, wrapping an arm around my waist. No matter how they react, you said what needed to be said. You look stunning doing it. My vision blurred with tears, but I managed a nod. This was supposed to be my wedding day, a celebration of love. Instead, it felt like I just delivered a monologue to an unsettled crowd, with my own parents acting as reluctant audience members. But as I blinked away the tears, one undeniable feeling remained. I felt seen. For the first time in my life, my family couldn't ignore me or my feelings. And maybe that was worth every awkward second that would follow. An uneasy hush settled over the reception hall the moment my final words faded away. Nobody seemed entirely sure what to do. Should they applaud, console me, hurry over to Celeste and comfort her wounded pride? In those first tense seconds, I almost regretted saying anything at all. But then Adrian's hand squeezed mine, anchoring me in the realization that this, finally standing up for myself, was something I'd needed to do for years. I stepped off the small makeshift stage, letting the microphone hang at my side. The DJ, looking a bit apprehensive, cued a gentle instrumental track to diffuse the palpable tension. My parents had risen from their seats. My mother made an abrupt dash toward Celeste, while my father took a few steps in my direction, his expression torn between anger and concern. I braced myself for the lecture I'd expected my whole life, the "how could you embarrass us like this?" scolding that felt inevitable. But he hesitated, glancing from me to Celeste as though unsure who needed him more. Celeste stood in the harsh glow of the stage lights like a goddess suddenly robbed of her worshippers. Gone was her effortless smile. She was pale, her eyes wide, lips trembling in a mixture of hurt and disbelief. The spotlight had been taken from her in a manner she likely never imagined, not because she'd messed up, but because I'd chosen to claim it. A pit of guilt stirred in my stomach, but I pushed it down. Hadn't I spent a lifetime swallowing that guilt every time they put her first? Sis, she said, her voice strained. What was that all about? I took a steadying breath. It would have been easier to snap back with a bitter remark, but I forced my tone to remain calm. That was my truth, Celeste, something I needed to say. My mother reached Celeste's side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Honey, are you all right? She whispered, casting me a pained look. I could practically hear the unsaid question in her eyes. Why would you ruin your own wedding? At the far side of the room, my bridal party hovered uncertainly, ready to intervene if things escalated. Sienna caught my eye, giving me a supportive nod. Guests began to murmur, some of them awkwardly stepping out to the foyer. Others shuffled in their seats, fiddling with champagne glasses, waiting to see what would unfold. One or two well-meaning relatives approached me, patting my arm in silent sympathy as though I were a bride on the brink of collapse. But I wasn't collapsing, far from it. My spine felt straighter than it ever had, my heart thrumming with an odd mix of relief and adrenaline. For once, I wasn't stammering or hiding. My parents couldn't wave me off with a polite shrug. They couldn't dismiss my words as sibling jealousy. I'd laid everything bare in front of them, in front of everyone, and now they had no choice but to face it. My father finally found his voice. Sweetheart, he said, taking a step closer. We never intended, he trailed off, struggling to find the right words. My mother, however, didn't hold back. You could have spoken to us privately, she hissed, her eyes filling with a strange mix of tears and anger. Why make a scene on your wedding day? I felt my temper flare. Because every time I tried to talk to you, you brushed me off. For years, Mom, today of all days, you and Dad were still pushing Celeste into the spotlight, and I needed to claim my own moment to tell you how it's felt. Celeste shook her head, tears streaking her mascara. I never asked for this, she whispered, her voice raw. It's not my fault people noticed me. Why are you blaming me? A spark of sympathy flickered in my chest. Had I blamed her unfairly, she'd certainly never demanded that my parents adore her more. Still, she had rarely gone out of her way to deflect their praise or share it with me. Over time, her inaction had stung almost as much as their favoritism. I'm not blaming you, I managed. I'm tired of being invisible. My mother pressed her lips together, her anger momentarily overshadowed by confusion. Invisible, we love you. Do you? The question escaped me, sharp as a knife. Because it hasn't felt that way. My entire life it's been Celeste this, Celeste that. My achievements never mattered as much. You never asked how it felt for me to watch you praise her and ignore me. A tension-laden silence wrapped around us like a tight band. Even Celeste had gone quiet, her usual composure fracturing as she processed the truth. My parents exchanged glances, clearly grappling with the fact that they were finally being called out in the most public way possible. This wasn't a conversation that would end quickly or cleanly. My throat constricted, tears threatening to spill. I didn't do this to hurt Celeste or to hurt you, I said, forcing my voice to stay level. I did it because I couldn't stand by one more time watching you treat my wedding day like it was another stage for Celeste's performance. I deserve more than that. Adrian deserves more. This is our day. My father looked at Adrian as though just remembering he existed. Adrian had stayed off to the side, giving me the space to hash this out, but now he stepped forward, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. "I love your daughter," he said gently, "and I respect your family, but it's been hard watching her struggle for your attention and never getting it. It's time you heard her, really heard her." For a moment, my parents looked at Adrian like he was speaking a foreign language. Then my mother closed her eyes, cheeks flushed. I didn't realize," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We never meant to make you feel like an afterthought." My heart twisted at the sincerity in her tone. For the first time, she looked remorseful, like she was genuinely confronting the reality of what her favoritism had done. Meanwhile, Celeste, still bristling with hurt, lifted her chin, tears trailing down her cheeks. "You could have told me," she said softly. "I might have backed off if I knew how much it hurt you." "Would you have?" I asked, not accusing, just honestly curious. "I tried to hint at it so many times. You seemed too happy with the attention to notice." That landed like a slap. She winced, her arms folding protectively across her chest. Another chorus of whispers rippled through the guests who remained, but no one dared to interrupt the family drama unfolding at center stage. Sienna, eyes glimmering with concern, hovered at the edge of the circle, ready to intervene if I gave her the signal. But I didn't. This was a confrontation long overdue. The DJ, apparently not sure what else to do, faded the background music to near silence, giving us the space to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. My father sighed, running a hand over his face. "Your mother and we got caught up in celebrating Celeste's achievements because they were so out there, so public. We never stopped to think how that might make you feel, but we love you always." My tears finally spilled over. "Love shouldn't feel like a second-place ribbon," I whispered. "I'm exhausted from trying to earn something that should have been freely given." For a second, no one spoke. My mother hovered by Celeste's side while my father stepped closer to me, his hand outstretched uncertainly. "I can't change the past," he said, "but I can listen now, we both can." Behind him, Celeste wiped her tears, looking genuinely shaken. The overshadowing star of my life had been thrown into a reality check. She opened her mouth, but it took her a moment to find the words. I'm sorry," she managed, her usually confident voice trembling. "I didn't see it, or maybe I just didn't want to see it, but I'm sorry." A wave of complicated relief washed over me. It wasn't a fix for all the years of hurt, but it was something, an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, we could start bridging the chasms between us. Adrian gave my hand another supportive squeeze, and I took a shaky breath. In the background, more guests began to inch closer, offering uncertain smiles or small gestures of encouragement. The wedding I'd envisioned as a day of sweet vows and joyous celebration had turned into a raw, emotional reckoning right in front of everyone. My mother looked around, realizing how many eyes were on us. She cleared her throat, trying to regain some composure. Perhaps we should talk more privately," she suggested, her voice gentler now. "But I'm sorry, too, for not seeing you the way you deserve to be seen." Her words struck a chord so deep that I started crying in earnest. Adrian wrapped his arms around me, and for a moment the world blurred as I pressed my face into his shoulder. My father exhaled slowly, stepping toward Celeste to rub her back. In that heartfelt, uncertain pause, the seeds of a long-overdue conversation had finally been planted. It wouldn't magically erase the years of pain or the ways my parents had uplifted Celeste at my expense. But for the first time, they couldn't ignore it. Everyone in that room, from distant relatives to my old classmates, had witnessed the raw truth. And if any day was the right day to demand real change, maybe it was my wedding day after all. I didn't expect the air to feel so still once the tension began to ebb. A moment ago, the entire reception hall had been humming with strained whispers, eyes darting between me, my sister, and our parents. Now the fervor had thinned. Some of the guests were making their way to the buffet or the bar, while others lingered in small clusters, casting glances our way. They were waiting to see if this public confrontation would spiral further, or if it might, by some miracle, lead to a fragile sort of peace. My mother gently nudged Celeste toward a chair at the edge of the room, away from the stage lights still trained on us. My father followed, and I went too, Adrian's steady arm supporting me. It felt oddly surreal, like a family meeting in the middle of a crowded train station with hundreds of spectators milling about. Yet in some strange way, it was exactly what we needed. There was no way to dodge the topic, no polite excuse to bury our emotions and smile for appearances. We'd already shattered the veneer of a picture-perfect event. Celeste sank into the seat, clasping her hands in her lap. She looked almost childlike, her makeup streaked from tears, as though the confident star had melted away, leaving only vulnerability. My mother stood behind her, fingers resting gently on her shoulder. My father, for his part, attempted to shepherd me closer. I resisted the instinct to shrink away. We were past that point. Instead, I planted myself beside Celeste, though I kept a careful distance. For a moment, none of us spoke, the hushed voices of our guests forming a soft backdrop. Then Adrian broke the silence, his voice calm but firm. "I know this isn't the time or place you would have chosen," he told my parents. "But sometimes the truth can't wait. It needs to be said when it needs to be said." My father nodded, his expression pained. "I understand," he said quietly. He turned to me, his eyes heavy with regret. I'm sorry you felt second best, sweetheart. I truly am. I guess we just got swept up in Celeste's gifts. She was always so visible and we didn't think. He stopped himself, shaking his head. No, that's not an excuse. We didn't make enough room for you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. In my mind's eye, I saw a collage of memories. Celeste at recitals, mom and dad cheering in the front row, me tagging along unnoticed. The sting was still there, but hearing my father acknowledge it was like a soothing balm on an old wound. It's not just about making room, I managed. It's about caring who I am, not just seeing me as some shadow. My mother nodded tearfully. We always cared, she said in a strained whisper, her fingers gripping Celeste's shoulder. Celeste was so driven, so bright. We wanted to nurture that, and maybe we forgot you needed nurturing too. My sister lifted her gaze to mine. I could have done more too, she said, voice wavering. I liked the attention, it made me feel special, but I never meant for you to feel unloved. Adrian rested a comforting hand on my back and I leaned into him, drawing on his quiet strength. Maybe if we talk more after the wedding, I suggested softly, we can figure out how to, I don't know, fix some of this, if that's even possible. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears. I'd like that, she murmured. My father wrapped an arm around her, looking at me with a tentative, hopeful expression. We can do better, he added, his voice low. We will do better. Celeste nodded, wiping her cheeks. I want that too. I don't want you to resent me forever. A surge of conflicting emotions crashed over me, relief, lingering hurt, and an odd swirl of happiness that there might be a path forward. It was messy, painfully so, but it was also real, raw, and long overdue. I realized then that this was the real significance of my wedding day, forging a new dynamic, even if it had taken a public confrontation to spark it. I glanced around at the half-full reception hall. The DJ was doing his best to keep soft music playing, and some of our guests were returning to their seats. My friends, especially Sienna, hovered nearby, worry etched on their faces. I gave them a small nod, signaling that I was okay. One crisis had ended, and although there was still tension buzzing through the air, I could breathe again. Adrian leaned in close. We should try to salvage the rest of the wedding, he whispered gently. We still have the cake cutting, the bouquet toss, there's a whole celebration waiting. A spark of guilt and joy flickered in my chest, guilt that I had derailed the festivities so dramatically, joy that it was still my wedding day and I could still make memories that weren't overshadowed by drama. You're right, I told him, offering a small, genuine smile, then I turned back to my family. We can pick this up later, for now though, I gestured to the guests, the untouched buffet, the quiet dance floor. I'd really love to celebrate marrying this wonderful man. My mother squeezed Celeste's shoulder one more time, then gave me a tremulous smile. Of course, let's do that. Celeste stood, hesitating before reaching out and giving my hand a brief squeeze. I squeezed back, a silent acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, we could still find common ground beyond the bitterness that had defined so much of our relationship. My father cleared his throat, blinking back tears, and motioned for them to head back to their table. He paused only once to murmur, "We're proud of you," before taking my mother's hand and leading her away. For a moment, I clung to Adrian, letting out a shaky breath. Are you okay? He asked softly, brushing away a stray tear from my cheek. I smiled, feeling oddly lighter than I had in years. I think so, I answered, my voice unsteady but honest. I feel seen, really seen for the first time. He pulled me into a gentle embrace, pressing his forehead against mine. And I see you, he murmured. Always, now come on, the DJ's going to think we bailated on the party. We made our way back to the center of the room, where some of the tension had begun to dissipate, replaced by murmurs of relief and cautious enthusiasm. Sienna waved from her seat and the DJ took the hint, switching tracks to something more festive. The overhead lights brightened once more, illuminating the dance floor that had minutes earlier been the scene of a soul-baring confrontation. Hand in hand, Adrian and I stepped onto that floor, inviting our guests to join us. It wasn't the smooth, carefree celebration I once imagined, and I'd probably spend months, if not years, sorting through the fallout with my family. But it was real, authentic, and after a lifetime of feeling sidelined, I realized there was a fierce kind of beauty in that truth. It signaled a beginning both for my marriage and for a more honest relationship with my parents and my sister. As the music surged around us, I caught a glimpse of Celeste drifting into the crowd, her gaze lingering on me with an expression I'd never seen before, thoughtful, maybe even admiring. My parents hovered a few steps behind, whispering to each other. For the first time, I felt no sharp pang of jealousy or anger toward them. Instead, there was an unsteady hope, a flicker of possibility that we might grow closer from this moment on. Adrian spun me around, and I laughed as the skirt of my wedding dress swirled in a shimmering arc. Despite the emotional storm of the evening, I allowed myself to sink into the music and the warmth of his arms, savoring the moment. This was still my wedding day, after all, the day I married the man who saw and cherished me, the day I finally stepped into my own light, and perhaps the first day of a new chapter in my family's story. And if it took a dramatic confrontation and a stage-stealing speech to claim that spotlight, then so be it. This day, in all its messy, emotional glory, belonged to me and Adrian, and no one could ever take that away.